Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, dumping ground deadline approaching. A federal commission is nearing a decision that could send thousands of tons of nuclear waste to our state. Plus,
connection is almost the opposite of addiction. When you're addicted, you narrow your view of the world, and basically your life revolves around that.
Reframing minds. A university doctor tells us how MDMA-assisted therapy is helping patients overcome trauma-driven addiction. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham is declaring a state of emergency in Sandoval County over a rush of floodwaters in the Jemez River. In about 25 minutes, I ask our line opinion panel if the overwhelming snowmelt causing that flooding could bring long-term benefits. In the second half of today's show, I sit down with the filmmaker behind a new documentary about Robert Oppenheimer. Writer and creator Larry Sheffield explains why he wanted to focus on the physicist's life after he created the atomic bomb. That's in less than 40 minutes. But first, the state's recreational cannabis market is celebrating its first birthday this month. Let's get to the line. Welcome to our line opinion panelists for the week. We're happy to be joined in person in our Albuquerque studios by Andy Lyman. He's a staff writer for the Santa Fe Reporter. Sean Griswold is here. He's editor at Source, New Mexico, and we're really pleased to have former state Senator Dede Feldman with us again as well. Thank you all for being here. Now, things are looking green for the cannabis industry here in New Mexico. It's been 1 year since recreational products hit shelves across the state, bringing in more than $300 million in taxable sales since last April. Now, Andy, you wrote several wonderful stories for a special issue of the Santa Fe Reporter this week examining trends that have emerged in the years since legalization. You profiled a small family-owned cannabis business, and they voiced a common concern of late, oversaturation in the market. I hear this a lot from a lot of different angles. We'll talk about this. Your takeaway on this first bit about oversaturation. True? False? People protecting markets, or what's going on there?
I think it's sort of a natural consequence or benefit to the way that the state has been issuing licenses. And I think part of the way they've been issuing licenses, or the reason they have, is sort of helping people that basically everyone that wants a license, they'll help get a license.
Right.
The state, I mean. And part of that, at least the notion there, is that it's part of that equity thing. Like, we want to make sure that everybody that wants a license gets one and put everyone on an even playing field. What that creates, obviously, is that everyone has a license, everyone can open a retail spot, assuming they hit the benchmarks for the cities that they're in. But yeah, what that creates is sort of like who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. How do you and in Santa Fe, it doesn't seem like it would be as saturated as you drive around Albuquerque. They're everywhere.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
But per capita, Santa Fe is right there.
Oh,
right?
interesting.
Yeah, if you look at a map, the RLD, the Regulation and Licensing Department has a map of the whole state where you can see where all these shops are. And they're all just right along Cerrillos. I mean, there's sort of a cluster downtown Santa Fe, and then just all the down Cerrillos until you get to I-25. So,
what are we talking about for currently licensed folks? How many are there out there in the state right now?
I believe the current, altogether licenses is something like 2,000. Wow. I want to say it's around the 400 as far as retail spots. I could be wrong on that.
Okay.
630, they said.
Yeah.
630.
Now,
okay.
keep in mind though, that's who's licensed. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're open and operating.
Gotcha.
Some people might be in the middle of their grow trying to get things ready, but yeah, there's a lot of licenses out there of different kinds.
I want to talk about that equity provision Andy just mentioned. Senator, we'll start with you. It's interesting. Lawmakers repeatedly say they wouldn't have legalized cannabis without an equity provision. And we remember those hearings in Javier. And, this is a big deal. And has the state done enough, in your view, Senator, to make sure minority communities affected by the war on drugs, this is what ostensibly the deal was, are we getting to some equity place now, in your view?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, from my point of view, Andy may know the answer to that question, but it was this provision was intended to address the ravages brought on by the war on drugs and the people that served time and the people whose families and life were really destroyed by unnecessarily by this kind of unjust thing. Now the criteria for getting sort of special permission under these licenses is pretty broad.
Right.
I mean, doesn't just seem to be applied to those people who were previously incarcerated or anything. It's people who are low income, who people who are from a rural area.
Right. And that's all it takes, yeah.
Yeah, and people of certain ethnic and racial. So, I mean, I think that might be pretty hard to administer for the regulation and licensing. It might take a lot of time to do that, and I really don't know how that's going and what percentage of licenses are due to that provision.
That's a good point. That's an excellent point. You know, Sean, at Source, got to ask you this. Of course, the city of Albuquerque has made noise about going beyond what's in state law to ensure that equity we're talking about, creating the Cannabis Equity Working Group in 2021, but according to reporting from your shop, Source New Mexico, the city hasn't responded to a 21-page recommendation report submitted to the mayor's office last spring. That's a whole year. What happened here? What's going on?
Yeah, it was interesting that this report was compiled by Black and brown women that are contracted by the city of Albuquerque. Okay. Did it through the city's equity office, reported it to the mayor, sat on the mayor's desk for 18 months. Wow. And Monday was the first time that city councilors were given a review of the actual report. Huh. Now the report does recommend, as Andy was discussing, outlines for how the city can promote and encourage people from marginalized communities to receive business licenses or growing licenses to get their foot in the door in the industry. Right. There's efforts there on expungement as well, and what people need to know to do to be able to get their record cleared, which to the state legislators' credit, that was very instrumental in legalizing recreational cannabis. Was without the provision of expungement for criminal records, the state wasn't going to legalize recreational cannabis, and so. To the state's credit, they do have that built in, but there still are concerns from people who have those records about what's the process that I need to do? How can I ensure to employers that this isn't on my record? And so the city is hoping to provide some resources that actually does outreach to individuals. But the other question here too is, and I think this is happening across the state with how much money all the state tax, all of the tax revenue the state's receiving from cannabis sales and recreational cannabis sales is going to the general fund. Right. And so this equity group is also requesting money not go directly to the general fund, or if it is, a portion of that go to some of these services that not only look to get, build businesses with some of these can be people who are generally left out of the industry, the expungement process, but also looking at substance use issues and providing mental health support for individuals who are struggling with addiction issues. Can
I bounce to the center before I get to you, Andy, on this? This is an interesting point, moving money into the general fund.
That's where it's going now.
That's right.
It's going to the general fund now with, I guess, a portion of the tax revenue going to local governments.
Right.
A third of it or something.
Something around there.
So, this is always a big issue with new revenue streams. Should it be earmarked for a certain purpose that might be related to the issue, or should it go into the general fund where legislators have more authority to appropriate it and use it as they see fit? Yep. So, it's an old story, but it certainly seems to me that this cries out for some sort of earmarking.
That's an interesting point. I want to come back to the earmark point too. And Andy, the recommendations in that report included creating a fund for cannabis social equity programs. We all know about that. Reinvestment of cannabis tax revenue, as Senator just mentioned, effective accounting of environmental and water impacts. We used to hear, during the run-up to this, we heard a lot about water impacts, not so much now. And the publishing of cannabis-related arrests and citations from APD. That's actually very, very interesting. Again, the nature of the argument here, give us a sense of what's the push and pull here? How far are people willing to go here?
I guess I don't know, and sort of to jump off of what Sean was talking about and that Source story that Austin Fisher wrote, that's a overlooked piece of equity. The obvious one is who gets a license, who gets a chance to get their foot in the door in this, but it's also for groups such as Drug Policy Alliance, they're saying a big piece of equity is to sort of help those people that were impacted by the war on drugs or just drugs in general, right? Which is, rehab or prevention, prevention stuff. And so I guess I'm sort of lost on why, even in Santa Fe, they're saying, over $500,000, we want to just keep it in the general fund. We don't know how much money this is going to provide.
That's right.
And so I'm not quite clear on why there's such a hesitancy to put that money someplace.
It may be, just if I could speculate, it may be because they don't know what the year-over-year revenue is going to be, and whether there has been a big, burst at the beginning of this program, and then it'll go down in the following years.
Let me get you to stay on that subject, and we can all touch on this. The idea here was there would be enough jobs, enough income, and enough everything, we can start to move away from oil and gas. Were we a little too anxious on that? I mean, that's a lot of money, $300 million, but it's not a lot of money at the end of the day compared to oil and gas.
No, it's not. I mean, I don't think it was ever really touted as a substitute for oil and gas, but as a piece of one alternative picture to oil and gas, and we need to continue to build that alternative picture.
Yeah. Do we know, Andy, how many jobs are currently being filled or operating in this? Because the governor, I seem to recall the number was 11,000 for jobs back when.
I think it depends on how broad you want to look, right?
Okay.
Because there's ancillary businesses too, right? There's a lot of people that are saying, oh, we'll do marketing for you, we'll create the leaderboards for your stores, we'll do security, I'll be your realtor to find a building. And then of course, if you're vertically integrated in an actual cannabis company, you could have jobs anywhere from growing to retail, anywhere in between, and marketing within that company. So I think it's hard to get a real idea of how many jobs there actually are.
That's fair enough. Sean, do we know what's the deal with delivery? Have you a lot of people understand there's delivery available for recreational marijuana, and some people are like, I've never heard of this. What are you talking about? I'm curious if in your reporting, if you come up on anything. I'm curious about these APD arrests and citations. What's going on with all that?
Well, actually, through Andy's reporting, we found out that the state has licensed over 30 couriers. Now, the state already had a courier system developed under its medical marijuana program, and that was considered like one of the best ways to provide access to rural medical patients to their medicine. And so, jumping off of that, I believe that's also the effort when it comes to couriers, is that you're providing access to cannabis for people who don't really necessarily have a dispensary or 5 dispensaries on their block. And so that's an effort there that I think is really growing. And could honestly boost into Mexico as another job that could provide more revenue for a private company that doesn't have to have a marijuana license, maybe a particular courier license, which I'm still quite unsure if that even exists, because then there's also the courier element of how do you transport your money back and forth. Like there's not necessarily a Brinks for marijuana, the big armored cars, and that also leads to some sort of federal issues regarding how money is transferred. So transportation is another element that we're actually looking into to see what is involved when it comes to not only moving your cash supply, which is the predominant amount of like the source of revenue that dispensaries have, but also your inventory, or the inventory of your packaging materials, or just how do you get your product over to a customer who lives hundreds of miles away in a rural community. So I think that's a very fascinating element to see New Mexico potentially grow into as we see more and more jobs come out of this industry.
Nice wrap up there. Interesting. Where you go up 4th Street right now, you might as well call it Cannabis Row. It's amazing. Like every other at the grass station at Manal and 4th. It's a drive up. You can drive up now and place your order and get it.
Manal's another one. That's their Green Mile in Albuquerque, because it's not really near schools or churches and stuff.
So fascinating. Imagine this all started with the idea to do state-run pop shops, and here we are. This is very interesting. Thanks to our Line Opinion panel. We'll meet back here at the table in less than 15 to talk about some pressing environmental concerns in our state, including a nuclear waste disposal plan and historic flooding in the Jemez River Valley.
Dr. Oppenheimer it's an American story. It's a story about where he's minding his own business, teaching in Berkeley, and he gets approached about this, thing that is of a national concern. He wants to do his patriotic duty. And then, it's the American story about the power and the greed in some ways, wants to destroy the very thing that he created.
Opioid addiction has destroyed lives and families across the country and here in New Mexico. It's a crisis UNM Hospital's Milagro program has focused on. especially for expectant mothers who are addicted. Now, the goal is to break the cycle of dependency, but the program's medical director, Dr. Larry Lehman, says methadone and buprenorphine treatments aren't always successful. That's why Dr. Lehman is about to launch a first-of-its-kind study to address the underlying mental traumas that feed addiction. Now, the program uses MDMA, a drug popularly known as ecstasy or Molly. But as Dr. Lehman tells senior producer Lou DiVizio, when given in a controlled setting, it can help moms overcome trauma-driven addiction and improve their bond with their child.
I want to talk about how you got involved with the Milagro program to begin with. What made you want to work with expectant mothers?
Sure. I was originally trained as a family medicine physician. Then I did some additional training in obstetrics, and so we had a whole maternal and child health program where we were taking care of mothers and babies. And people thought that was a great model to get involved with the opioid population. So initially I took care of the babies for a few years, then I was invited to be the medical director of Milagro. And so that's about maybe 12 years ago, and started doing that work. And that was, I kind of naturally led in actually to this work, because what I learned from that is I learned more that the heart of addiction is actually trauma and wounding that's occurred. And that, doing work like this study actually is the first one to look at, medications that can actually help people process their trauma.
So one of the medications that's being used right now is methadone. Are there any drawbacks to that type of treatment for?
Yeah, so there's two main medicines. There's methadone and there's buprenorphine. Methadone, it's great, for people, to be getting off of heroin, fentanyl, oxycodone. Methadone is very restricted, and so people have to get their doses either every day or they can get some take home, so they're a little bit tied into the system there. Some people find that they have some side effects with methadone, and they feel, sedated from doing that. Buprenorphine is a little bit more flexibility, especially in a state like New Mexico. You can get prescribed a 30-day supply, and so if you live in Silver City or you live in the res, you have that's more convenient for most people.
Okay, how can psychedelic treatments be more effective than something like
sure.
that?
So it's a different paradigm than buprenorphine or methadone. We're not really using a replacement therapy. What we're doing is really a one-time treatment with people where they will go through a 12-week therapy time. They'll have we call it MDMA assisted therapy, and I think that's important. It's not that the medicine itself can cure addiction or trauma. It can allow for the therapy there, and what it does is it temporarily suppresses the fear. Like when people have had trauma that's caused PTSD, there's lots of things that trigger things in their life that triggers things, and the actual idea of processing that trauma is really scary for people.
Now, when you mentioned trauma, how can you nail that down? How important is it to get to that before we see any other signs of progress in terms of dependency?
Yeah, well, let me describe a little bit how the MDMA therapy works. So the people that are eligible for this study have opioid use disorder. They're stabilized enough, to do the therapy, which means methadone or buprenorphine, and then they've had children within the last 6 to 12 months. And so the reason we're focusing on this population is they have both PTSD, they meet the criteria for moderate to severe opioid use disorder. So what they do in the study, they'll have 3 sessions with a therapist team. That team really is to sort of establish the background. It's to establish a trust that's important during the experimental sessions. My experience as an MDMA therapist has been that it often goes deeper. It goes into wounding that happens in childhood, whether it's actually abuse or neglect, and so it goes back into what we call, sometimes we talk about in trauma, we'll say big T and little t. Big T is something like a military trauma, exposed to somebody in the family being killed with violence, sexual abuse. The little trauma though can happen if your parents were addicted to heroin and you didn't get the same amount of care. So there's something called intergenerational trauma, and we're hoping that this will help with the intergenerational trauma as well.
How does the idea of connection play into this, and why is it so important for all people, but for mothers specifically?
Yeah, that's a great question. But when we talk about connection, some people have described, and I think this is accurate, that connection is almost the opposite of addiction. When you're addicted, you narrow like your view of the world, and basically, if it's something like heroin or fentanyl, your life revolves around that. You narrow down your relationships. People who don't use have largely been cut off from people, and so it's a very narrow, restricted way of being. By looking at connection, we're talking about it at multiple levels. Like one connection is simply like, what's your connection to family, people in the community, people to support you. Some of it is more internal. What's your connection to yourself? I mean, kind of your own internal processes, and some of it is broader too. It's actually connection to things like the natural world. Going out hiking. All those can be part of sort of the part of the healing process. The classic psychedelics, things like psilocybin, work I think very directly on affecting interconnectedness in the brain and the outer level. MDMA works a little bit different.
Now with the mother specifically, a connection with her child, how will this treatment help in that process? Is that an important thing that you need to help facilitate?
Yeah, we think so. And I always want to, this is research, so we don't really know what we're going to find out, but the hypothesis here is that about half of the pregnant people that we see with opioid use during the pregnancy have PTSD, and probably more if you included them, the little t trauma. So we're hypothesizing is that MDMA, which appears in other studies to be very effective for PTSD, by treating the PTSD, will decrease the likelihood that the person relapses. What we see is after the pregnancy, about 50% or more people by a year later have started using, they're back to heroin or fentanyl and such. And that's how I got interested in doing this. I mean, I was doing pregnancy care. I would take care of people. We'd get through the pregnancy, they get stable in the postpartum, and I would think things were going well, and then I wouldn't see them because we'd done that, and then a year and a half later, they're back using heroin, pregnant again. And I saw that over and over again. Eventually, maybe I'm not really getting at the heart of this. And so the hope is that by treating the PTSD will affect the resumption of the opioid use, but also, when people have had trauma, it affects our ability, connection, to be able to connect with people. One of the deepest connections is the maternal infant bonding connection. And so that's one thing we're going to study. We're going to be looking at how the people are bonding with their baby, how are they going to be doing that, and how does that change during the study. And the hope is that it'll help with what's broadly called maternal infant attachment. And that's one of the factors that we think is part of intergenerational trauma. Part of it is like if you grow up in the family when there's active use, part of it is if you've been exposed to your own trauma, but part of it appears to be transmitted through the mothers, and that can happen at every levels, from like genetics and what's called epigenetics, and it can happen also through the way that people relate the attachment.
Can you explain why people can't do this themselves, why this needs to be in a controlled setting? You can't just go get some MDMA and refrain your own mind.
Yeah, thanks so much for bringing that up, because we don't want people to, so first of all, if they're doing it themselves, they are probably using street drugs. The street drugs that are sold as MDMA, and they have names like ecstasy and Molly, by and large, they may or may not have MDMA. They're contaminated with amphetamines and other substances, so they won't actually be getting even the drug there. But really, there's what we call the container here, and the therapists are really the containers, so that before they enter the experimental session, they'll have had at least 3 sessions before the first one with the therapist team. We'll be there for the whole time with them, and so we'll establish a trust during that time. Once you have the trust there and you have the use of the MDMA, it's not a very directive therapy. I'm not, sitting there while they're doing their MDMA saying, talk to me about your trauma. We're just there for them. And what happens is when you take away that deep fear, then the triggers with the MDMA, people naturally want to talk about their trauma. They've been prepped for the idea that this is a safe place to talk about that. while they're doing the MDMA, they'll usually start out with eye shades and headphones, and they'll initially go within. And often what will happen is they'll go back, they'll relive some of the scenes in their trauma, and multiple times during the session, which lasts about 5 hours, they'll come out, take their eye shades off, and we're just there for whatever they want, but they want to talk. They want to talk through the trauma.
When will your study begin, the MDMA study?
Yeah, we're anticipating starting in about 3 or 4 months.
Okay.
We have a couple of, we've gotten, it's about a 2-year process to get this going. You need to get approval by the FDA, approval by UNM. The DEA will be coming to visit us in a month or 2 and looking at the facilities. We're still in the fundraising process. I wanted to mention this study is actually rather unique. So MDMA has been used in different ways around the world. This is actually the first study that'll be done for opioids. It's only the second study in the whole world as far as with substance use. They've done some work with alcohol, and so this really is sort of a unique opportunity for us to actually see, does this work? Does actually treating PTSD with MDMA help that part of it?
Do you think a successful study like this could help people understand that you can change if you're in, you can change your mind to become a better version of yourself, maybe that's not the best way to phrase it, but to be able to change your mind, how important is it for people to know that that is possible?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. So I think a key part of how does MDMA work, and I think what it does is it allows people to reframe their memories, kind of understand their memories from a different, different point of view, understand, what is their potential. It gives them a glimpse of, for a 4 to 6 hour period, living without that fear, living without those triggers, and so that can help model there. But what's happening is they're bringing up their traumas, and there's a certain beauty of seeing this process, seeing someone who came to see us for for relationship trauma, and by the end of the 3rd session, they're processing through their deeper childhood issues, and people have said, which I think is accurate, that there's a potential to achieve the same thing that may take many years in other therapies in a relatively short time window. So we're excited to have this happening here in New Mexico.
Space is so big. A lot of people say that it makes them feel insignificant. We are very tiny in the grand scheme of things, but being able to look out and see some of these things that are so far away, so big, the scale of this is so unimaginable, and yet we are able to take part in that. We are part of that, and so in one sense you feel small, in another sense you feel big, and it's just kind of magic.
Welcome back to our Line Opinion panel. New Mexico sits at a crossroads this week as the federal government decides the fate of one toxic waste site and considers plans for another. The feds need state approval to keep the waste isolation pilot plant known as WIPP up and running for the next 10 years. According to Source New Mexico, the site's current permit calls for the plant to close next year, and a federal report claims WIPP could run out of disposal space by 2025. It's right around the corner. This is all happening as federal officials consider licensing another nuclear waste site in southeast New Mexico. Now, if that is approved, Holtec International will open a multi-million-dollar dumping ground that could hold nearly 9,000 metric tons of spent nuclear waste. Now, when WIPP began operating here in New Mexico, we opened the doors for this state to be where the rest of the country stores waste they don't want. Senator, am I right on that? And are we about to take a corner to be just known as the dumping ground for the rest of the country? Hate to start off with such a stark question, but that's a lot of folks are very afraid of that right now.
Oh, well, I think the civic leaders from southeast New Mexico literally solicited the Holtec plant to come to that area, using the argument that we're willing to do this. We're trained. We know the ropes. It's really unfortunate, I think, for the rest of the state because of the transportation issue. This stuff has to be transported to this remote location through New Mexico, and of course, there's a big difference between the two facilities. One is public and one is private. One is, Holtec is to house very, very dangerous high-level waste. And the other, WIPP, more long-lasting transuranic waste that is maybe not quite so dangerous immediately, but it's going to last 250,000 years.
That's right. If those barrels don't give way first underground,
Right.
and we've covered that at this table, certainly. Andy, interestingly, standing in the way of the proposed Holtec site, Senator just mentioned, is a new bill the governor signed last month, as you know. It blocks the feds from creating a high-level waste site without state approval, but that legislation doesn't go into effect until June 15th, and the NRC says it could make its decision in May. A bit of a dilemma here. How much teeth does that actually have, what was passed in Santa Fe to stop this?
Well, I mean, again, I think timing-wise, it would have a lot more teeth if it was.
Right.
But that's also just sort of the nature of the legislature. You know, that's just, there's a timeline of things that happen. I guess, and maybe the senator could speak on this better, but I would imagine that there's some sort of provision of, okay, now the law's in effect. I don't know. That creates a whole headache and mess of untangling there, I think.
They're trying to get in front of it. You know, the governor is trying to get in front of this and others. And is it futile with this bill that was passed out of the legislature?
No, I think it's really a good thing that this bill passed out of the legislature. The Attorney General has also weighed in with the governor. The governor signed it right away, the next day, as a signal that this is really important before the NRC inevitably, in my view, issues its permit.
Right.
The EPA one, though, is pending. I think a little bit longer term, and this is going to create a lot of problems for Holtec, and I don't think, particularly because it's a private facility rather than a DOE facility.
Well, there's oversight issues. There's all kinds of issues with private versus a federal
Well, the
installment,
state, in some ways, has more of a handle on it because they have to issue building permits. They have to do transportation permits. There's a whole bunch of stuff. If you want to build anything in New Mexico, you got to jump through a lot of hoops, not just environmental ones.
Good points there. Sean Griswold, interestingly, there's a fundamental question here. Senator mentioned the folks down in this part of the Eddy and Lee County are actively seeking to bring folks in. Are these elected officials choosing economic growth over health and safety of their folks down there?
You know, it appears that economic growth is impactful, and it's part of even Holtec's plan. They're saying that they're going to be offering more than 250 jobs, $75,000 job.
It's a lot of money
at the
Southeast
time.
New Mexico.
A lot of money Southeast. Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of oil and gas money that pay a little bit on that at the beginning, and that's kind of what we were discussing. You know, earlier off the side of the show with the senator was, you know, when this started in 1999 or a little bit years before that, as they were soliciting these industries, oil and gas was not where it was today, and so now that you have another type of industry that's active that also has to go into the ground, into the earth, potentially, hopefully not over any type of waste site, or could disturb those waste sites. I think that there's a lot more to consider when it comes to that. But these are also massive industries. I mean, you mentioned, you know, it being a nation dumping ground. We're also talking international waste that could get to New Mexico if this group were to expand.
That's right.
I think one of the bigger elements too that we're going to consider, you know, with the timing of the different applications being filed, even if the feds approve Holtec's plan, Holtec would still also have to apply for state permits with the Department of Energy as well as the Department of Transportation. And under the new law, the state does have some very strict guidelines. Number one, not to solicit new permitting grants for nuclear storage waste. So that goes direct conflict with the state law. But then where it's going to become a big thing is going to become the battle in courts where it's preemptive arguments are going to be made. You know, the concept where state laws are trump county laws and federal laws trump state laws. So we could end up, this Holtec negotiation could be going down for years before anything is ever actually built or dug into the ground.
That's a fair point.
And the hope is that in that time period, there will be another permanent waste facility designated by the federal government. That's the problem here, is that this is supposed to be an interim facility, and yet interim facilities have a way of becoming permanent, don't they?
Thank you.
That's what's happening with
program.
That's right. That's right. Interesting. I'm going to change up just a little bit here, guys, and go to another environmental issue that's out there. Heading north to Sandoval County, far different environmental concern up there, and that is water. The governor declared a state of emergency in Sandoval County last week because The Jemez River is running, causing flooding in the Jemez River Valley, Andy. Ranches, neighborhoods, an anomaly, climate change. What's going on here? A lot of the whiplash between drought and flooding we're suffering here in New Mexico. It's a difficulty.
It's hard not to see this as an effective or impact of climate change, right? I mean, when you see that the snowpack is melting faster than we would want it to, and everything's rushing down the river, and then when things freeze up again, it sort of slows down. And there were some really great quotes in a lot of the stories that have come out, or not quotes, but you know, that sort of that we're at nature's mercy. We can't really control what happens. I mean, I guess we have impacts on it, but it's we're just sort of at its will.
That's right.
You know?
Senator, you have local knowledge of the Jemez River Valley, that's for sure, personally. And what's the flooding been like? Have you been up to see it? Or?
You know, yes, we have a weekend place up in Jemez Springs, which was the epicenter of this. And I got to tell you, I was delighted. It was wonderful to see this surge, this spring runoff, and see the Bosque flooded and the banks of the Jemez River beginning to meander rather than having a straight channel. This was what it used to be like. Now, and the danger is over. I went around and looked at the beginning of last week, which is when it was at its height. I think maybe 7 or 8 feet.
Oh, wow.
9 feet is flooding. And Jemez Springs had that in 1942, was the last time. The river is now at about 6 feet. And that's really not a problem, except for one thing, and this is, I think, characteristic of a lot of rural communities, and that is they have their small sewage treatment plant located right next to the river.
Oh boy.
And so they have that because, you know, a lot of people like to live next to the river.
That's right.
when they're in these rural communities. And if they have septic tanks, then that pollutes the river. So therefore, the municipalities, when they have the money to do it, build these small sewage treatment plants. And in this case, the sewage treatment plant was flooded.
Wow.
And the pumps failed, and sewage did get into the river. Not enough to really pollute the river. The E. coli count was 1, and the contamination is 4. And they have been pumping out and sort of rescuing the sewage treatment plant. There was also a pipe that failed. And there's been excellent coordination between the Pueblo, which is downstream of Jemez Springs, and they are dumping some of this waste into a lagoon at Jemez Pueblo.
Okay.
But it's being managed effectively, I think, and the weather is getting a little chillier. Last week there was a big warm spell, that set a big surge of river water down there. So
it's the talk of the West, California to here, and Sean, everyone's talking about this, a blessing in disguise, and now we have to manage this. So does the area need more dams, flood-based infrastructure? Have we learned from that flooding we had back in the old Cerro Grande fire, you know, that went through and wiped out Dixon Apple Farm, and they were placing barriers? Do we need to do better at that? Just count on flooding at this point?
You know, I think that what the senator had to say about Jemez Pueblo, you know, downstream having capacity to manage a lot of the flooding is because of the infrastructure that the Pueblo now has. The Pueblo has enterprises like a Department of Transportation that they operate with road projects. They have a housing development. They have an early childhood center. There's even natural resources departments that are built to operate and manage the flooding and irrigation that, you know, there are still farmers who are using this water within the Pueblo who have massive spaces of land. That's where you get that good, you know, Jemez Pueblo chili. And so I think that seeing the capacity for the Pueblos to have that, you know, millions of dollars in infrastructure to help sustain the sort of state, county, and then even local townships collaborative, that's how you strengthen it. Because for the longest time, there was always state, county, and then the Pueblo, which was kind of always trying to keep up, but didn't have, you know, the substantial resources that it does now. But yeah, that's, I think, been beneficial to this overall effort. So it doesn't, affect people even further down the stream, like by San Isidro, which is further down, and also even the road conditions, so people can still access their homes.
Flooding's an issue. It's so interesting to go from dead, dry, dust blowing around to more water than we can manage. California, Lake Mead's coming back up. I'm not quite sure where Elephant Butte is, if anybody's heard, if we're starting to rise our water levels down there from the runoff. All we can do is hope at this point. Senator, have you heard? Look, you might have.
I think the reservoirs in northern New Mexico are filling up, but the amount that's in Elephant Butte is just dependent upon the releases from those reservoirs.
It's going to take a long time for Elephant Butte downstream, that's for sure. Thanks again to our line panel as always for this week. Be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics we covered on our social media pages, and check out an extra conversation I have with this group about new schedules coming to Albuquerque Public Schools. That's on the New Mexico in Focus YouTube page. But right now, we're looking ahead to the premiere of a new film profiling a polarizing figure here in New Mexico's history, and that would be Robert Oppenheimer. New Mexico filmmaker Larry Sheffield's documentary pieces together old footage, declassified documents, and other research from months and years after the nuclear test at White Sands Missile Range. And this week on New Mexico in Focus Facebook page, I spoke with Mr. Sheffield about the inspiration behind his film and the continued fascination with Oppenheimer's legacy. You've got an interesting event coming up regarding a very specific time in Mr. Oppenheimer's history, and it's after Trinity. And we have spent so much time in our culture through Hollywood and other places talking about the before and the run-up and the during, but not so much after. Why did you want to cut it at this way and look at his life after Trinity?
Well, what's interesting is, so our film, for the benefit of the viewer, we talk a little bit about before, during, and after Trinity, but the biggest part of the film is after Trinity and all the things that happened after. My father wasn't involved in the military, but my grandfather was brought out to New Mexico to work at Los Alamos in the Manhattan Project, so I do have a personal connection. But anyway, I felt like I had a perspective that needed to be told, and I wanted to do 3 documentary films to tell the whole story of everything that was going on in New Mexico and southern New Mexico between that period of time. And we just couldn't do it all in one project. It's actually hard to try to do it in 3 different segments, but we have a trilogy that we're producing. We've done 2 of the 3 films, and the third one is about half finished. And all 3 of these will focus on just that moment in time around the Manhattan Project and the events that happened thereafter. And in the second film, which we're showing in Los Alamos this weekend, we really focus on Dr. Oppenheimer, because he was absolutely the pivotal personality of this whole story. And it was his actions and reactions that took place that we really try to focus on.
What is the continuing fascination with this man? I've read a lot about him. I've watched a lot about him, and it's so interesting, Larry. I don't know if we've ever wrestled it to the ground, who this man was.
Right.
Do you feel you have?
Oh, I mean, I'm studying. I told his grandson's in our film, by the way, and we interview him. And when I was out interviewing him, I said, I've really studied your grandfather, and I really tried to get into his head, and I read just about everything he said during this period of time, and I've tried to find every audio tape and film tape that I can that is about your grandfather. And he was a very, very complex yet simple man. He was very comfortable in New Mexico because he liked the simplicity of living out and horseback riding, hiking. He loved our foods, and he loved our people, and the people loved him. He was the kind of person that he didn't care if you were a scientist or the person working on his car. He would befriend you and be friendly and get to know you. And so he was a really interesting guy, had a lot of charisma. And you hear all the stories about the scientists through all their trials and tribulations. It was Oppenheimer's leadership and charisma that kind of got him, off to the next beat. So a really interesting guy. spoke French, he spoke English. I'm sure he spoke a little bit of Spanish. And so he was just a really interesting person.
Did he document a lot of his thoughts in life in writing? Was he one to scribe things in a journal? And do we have a trail that way to his inner thoughts?
I don't think he kept a daily journal. I think what he did more of was speak. And, he spoke during during the events in Los Alamos, but he spoke even more after the events in Los Alamos. So our film covers a lot of his speeches, and having to go through those speeches so I could find the little bits of gold that are in all of that material. We have some really interesting things that he says that are very deep and personal convictions that he had. And so it's those speeches that really tell the story. But I've never found a journal or, a lot of, there's a lot of things that he wrote, but not on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. We're talking to Larry Sheffield. He's the director of Oppenheimer After Trinity, which will debut on April 22nd. That's Saturday at the Sala event at the Los Alamos Event Center. We'll talk about that at the end of the interview. As Larry mentioned up top, those are sold out. That is sold out, but there are other screenings coming up. How is it he is so polarizing still today? I mean, 1945 was a long time ago, Larry. What is it about is it him? We've got a Christopher Nolan dramatization coming up this summer. We had that Manhattan television series for a couple of years out of WGN in Chicago a few years ago. Everybody wants to kind of keep taking their cut at Dr. Oppenheimer. And it's so fascinating. What is going on here, all these years later?
Well, Dr. Oppenheimer it's an American story. It's a story about where, he's minding his own business, teaching in Berkeley, and he gets approached about this, thing that is of a national concern. He wants to do his patriotic duty along with others, even though they're maybe not as focused on the politics of it. They realize the urgency of us not having a madman take us over because he gets this technology first. And so he puts all of his resources night and day, his blood, sweat, and tears, and he's successful. And then, it's the American story about the power and the greed in some ways, wants to destroy the very thing that he created. The whole time he is trying to warn everyone, the politicians, the people, that this is what we've created. It needs to be handled as gently and carefully and methodical. And it's almost as if, he wasn't listened to. So there's a lot of American story attributes. There's a lot of human story attributes that are in this one personality of this man. And as I mentioned earlier, he's as sophisticated to the most, he can sit down and shop talk with Einstein, but at the same time, I found so many stories where he befriended people that, his mechanic, his favorite place where he ate, he got very close to the folks that owned, that particular cafe near Los Alamos. So he was the kind of guy that, once again, he befriended everybody.
Mm-hmm. That is kind of interesting. A little insight into the man there, because it's easy to think of him as just this standalone character living in a bubble, just hung up on what, the everyday life of Mr. Oppenheimer is not something we think about generally. Did you learn something new in your research and in your goal to get this film done? Was it something about Dr. Oppenheimer that surprised you? You hadn't realized it previously?
I think just the tragedy of the story. I went into this with a whole lot of different ideas and thoughts on how to present it. But the thing that kept coming back to me was the tragedy of what was done, taking away his security clearance, and the fact that he, lived his entire life to the very end trying to persuade his peers and the people at the time about this novel power. And I don't think he was ever ashamed of doing the job, but he certainly wanted us, the world, to work together in harmony and to try to control this genie out of the bottle, as you would call it.
That brings us to the screenings and the folks that you're working with in Los Alamos. They are tickled, obviously, to be involved with you. Tell us about what's for folks, that don't know what Sala is and the organization. Tell us about that a little bit, if you would, and we'll talk about how folks can see the film after a fashion.
Absolutely. So Los Alamos has one theater, and it closed. It was a commercial theater, but it kind of shut down, and a very innovative gentleman bought it that still wants to show films and also have a kind of a community center where people can come and have different events and different community things. And so when I was showing the very first film that we had done, Alamogordo, Center of the World, Trinity 1945, we had the opportunity to show that film in the lodge on the very day of the Trinity test, July 16th. And it was just really an honor for me to be there. But I met Alan, and he said, I have a theater that's available, and maybe on your next film, if you want to show it, we can do that. And we decided, Dr. Oppenheimer's birthday would be a great time to do that. And I promised the people of Los Alamos that this is their film. It belongs to them. There's a lot of footage that so many of them are going to see that they've never seen before. And so I said, I want to show it in your community first. And I want you guys to be the first ones to have the advantage of seeing this.
It's International Dark Sky Week, a time to look up and think about what we can see, not with high-powered telescopes or NASA technology, but what we can see with our own eyes. Light pollution has blocked the night skies in so many places worldwide, but this week, as our land senior producer Laura Paskus reports, everyone is encouraged to turn out the lights so we can all see the natural beacon shining down from above us.
For millions of years, throughout our evolution as a species, we have looked to the same night sky. We've told stories, navigated, wondered what lies beyond our own beautiful Earth. That sky belonged to all of us, not just a few.
Space is so big, a lot of people say that it makes them feel insignificant. We are very tiny in the grand scheme of things, but being able to look out and see some of these things that are so far away, so big, the scale of this is so unimaginable, and yet we are able to take part in that. We are part of that. And so in one sense you feel small, in another sense you feel big, and it's just kind of magic.
Today, we celebrate dark places, call them dark sky parks, and the National Park Service holds star parties, treating the night sky with the same reverence as deep canyons or remote mountaintops.
We can look at the Ring Nebula, and the Ring Nebula is exactly what it sounds like. It's a ring floating in the sky. It's almost a perfect ring. And what it is it's a dying star. The day that I discovered the things that I can see through an amateur telescope is a day that I'll remember till the day I die. I saw objects that looked like diamonds scattered on velvet. I saw clouds, and I saw galaxies. I saw galaxies that were 300 or 400 million light years away. And the idea of then showing that to somebody and saying the light from this galaxy left that galaxy long before dinosaurs even walked the earth, and seeing their faces just go, whoa, that's as cool as it gets. You can't beat that.
Isabel and Rick from Brownsville, Texas, stopped at the Capulin Star Party while on vacation.
We're all stardust. We're all stardust. We're all part of the universe, So it's just, something that, you gaze upon on a daily basis if you're out, and you wonder,
It's just beautiful at night.
Absolutely.
But over the past century, we've steadily changed our relationship with the sky. In his novel, Contact, Carl Sagan wrote about cosmic isolationism, of how, without even noticing, most people cut themselves off from the sky. We learned more about what lies beyond our own world. We've looked deeper into space, but our own sky view, we lit it up, concealed so much of what we used to see.
One of the things that we lose in terms of our children, particularly, is we are limiting the scope of their imagination and their curiosity. And that has, of course, tremendous repercussions for the future. We lose the appreciation that we personally get from looking at the sky. If the sky is nothing but a glow above you from the streetlights, then there is nothing to see, and there's nothing to appreciate.
Finn says there are simple ways to fight light pollution. Turn off outside lights, light cities more responsibly, even close your curtains at night.
One of the nice things about light pollution is that it doesn't destroy the night. It just hides it. So you can get the light back like that if you just turn off the lights. There are not a lot of environmental things where the solution is so easy.
Carl Sagan wrote about how at the very moment that humans discovered the scale of the universe and found that our most unconstrained fancies were in fact dwarfed by the true dimensions of even the Milky Way galaxy, we took steps that ensured that our descendants would be unable to see the stars at all. But we can change that. We can protect the skies all of our ancestors watched. We can turn out the lights and look up and wonder together. For New Mexico in Focus and Our Land, I'm Laura Paskus.
In case you missed the coverage, the Albuquerque City Council on Monday approved a $200 million infrastructure plan. There was some pretty good debate, as you might imagine, considering how many things have not seen an upgrade. Now, housing, roads, lighting, it was all in there, ready for your approval for a bond vote this fall. But there was one item approved that needs illuminating and an explanation. Your city council has approved $4 million to move a museum. That's right, the Unser Racing Museum, currently sitting in Los Ranchos and drawing less than 20,000 visitors a year, in no small part because of its absurd location, which brings me to the historical rub here. Now, back in 2005, when the location for the Unser Racing Museum were announced, then Mayor Martin Chavez lost his mind, and with good reason. The Unsers represent 9 Indy 500 wins, Pikes Peak victories, you name it, they have won it. Now, if you're new here, the Unser name back then was Albuquerque, and Mayor Chavez knew that museum needed to be in the city proper for obvious reasons. Now, he even had a building near Old Town earmarked for it, right south of I-40, but some members of the Unser family didn't want to hear about it. It got ugly between them and the mayor, and in the scrum, a major tourist draw was left to rot on a barely accessible location. And now, you get to pay $4 million plus to do what should have happened in 2005. Now, here's a question. Is the Unser family going to kick in financially to make up for their decision? Now, don't forget the Unsers in the past floated the idea of moving the whole thing to Indianapolis, which makes some sense, but now Nebraska is the threat. But is Central and Unser, the new proposed location, truly any better for the city than Montano? Councilor Pena calls Central and Unser, quote, the heart of the city, end quote. I would debate that. Now, I'm a race car guy, and the Unser name means something to me personally. But in this season of museum follies we are currently suffering, this idea needs a yellow flag, perhaps even red. Thanks again for joining us, for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.
Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by the viewers like you.